has really expanded our understanding of what resilience needs to look like in the future. And obviously we all, most of us on this call have probably been working in smart cities, so therefore understand the importance and the huge benefits and opportunities that come from smart solutions and the use of data and platforms to deliver services more efficiently and effectively at city level for a better quality of life. Just a bit of background here. Hopefully most of you know EUROCITIES. We're the network of the largest cities across Europe. We have over 145 members, and the Smart Cities Information System is a knowledge platform for sharing and exchange and collaboration between cities and other actors to become around smart city solutions. So that's us. Better introduce myself. I'm Brooke Flanagan. I'm project coordinator at EUROCITIES. I'm joined by my colleague Manon Gislaine, who has been organizing this webinar along with our colleague Albert Engels from the city of Rotterdam, who you'll be hearing from shortly as well. Just housekeeping, if we can go to that slide. Yes, if you can, obviously keep yourself muted and keep your microphone off, and keep your camera off if you're not speaking. That would be super. We will be recording the webinar from now on and for dissemination purposes, so just please be aware of that. And it will be put on our website, as various webinars and city dialogues are, for people who can't attend to then access them afterwards. In terms of the process for today, we have 5 speakers. They will all be presenting for about 7 minutes. There they are. Following the speakers, we will then have a question and answer session and then a panel discussion. So in terms of your participation in that, what would be really useful is if you can either raise your hand. If you see on the little control panel, there's a hand. And if you click on that, then we'll know that you want to ask a question and we can hand over the floor to you. Otherwise, you can put your question into the chat box. If you're going to do that, please just tell us where you're from beforehand as well. So that makes it a little bit easier to understand where the question is coming from. I just ask if you can maybe hold off on raising your hand until we open the floor to questions. Sometimes the little symbol can be a tad distracting. So I think that is about it. You can see our agenda there, as I mentioned. And I think now I will hand over to Albert Engels. Albert is one of our members in the city of Rotterdam. There's a lovely photo of Albert. He is also currently the chair of the board of coordinators of the Smart Cities and Communities group of projects, which are, as the name says, Smart Cities and Communities projects. There's currently, I think, about 17 of those, and they are covering a range of smart city issues, smart city solutions, and they've been running for, I think we're up to about year 6 of Smart Cities and Communities projects. So Albert's currently the chair of that and also part of the Ruggedized project through the city of Rotterdam. So Albert, I will hand over to you now.
Yeah, thank you very much, Brooke. Okay, my name is Albert Engels, as Brooke already mentioned, and I work for the city of Rotterdam. And as well, I am the coordinator of Ruggedized, one of please, the next slide, if possible. Yes, thank you. As Brooke already mentioned, I work for the city of Rotterdam, and I'm coordinator of Ruggedized, one of the 17 smart city projects within the Horizon 2020 program. And for now, you're going to see on the screen, we have now more than 100 cities joining this interesting program for the last 6 years. 17 projects, 100 cities more than, and a lot of working together with knowledge institutes and of course private partners. So the collaboration is quite immense, and I think a very good opportunity to work together, but still that's of course difficult. It's sometimes more like an art than just working together. And within these 17 projects, we have a kind of a board of coordinators where all coordinators are joining. And during the last few years, because that was, I think, a rather good opportunity for all projects to join in, is that we thought, do we have to come up with a new network? Because we have more than 100 cities and knowledge institutes. I think we have more than 500 partners within this network. So we thought, do we have to come up with a new network? And after some sessions, we thought, no, that's not a good idea. It is better to get better connected with other already existing networks. Please, following slide, please. And that's why we came up last year and this year to get better connected with well-known networks like Open and Agile Smart Cities and the GRCN, Global Resilient Cities Network, formerly known as 100 Resilient Cities, and of course with the connection with the EIP, European Innovation Partnerships, and with SCIS. And that's what we set up this few last months to get better connected. So that's, I think, a very good opportunity for to have with, especially with OASC with the GRCN, to have more connections with all the cities already joining, because the GRCN is a worldwide organization, and what we have here in Europe is more European wide. But still, I think that's was a very good chance, and I think with the COVID, we are now in a very good position to do more collaboration for the coming months, and that's please next slide. Yes, because we all know that city challenges are too complex to do it on your own. So that's why we are not trying to come up with a new network. And this is, I think, as well the reason why we do this webinar, because all smart solutions what we have to do within the smart city projects are more technocratic based, and not so much with resilience. And I think, and it's not my only opinion, but I think for all of us counts that resilience should be more emphasized within projects, not only for these projects, but I think for the coming projects within Horizon Europe, etc., etc. So that would be, I think, a good idea. That's why we have invited some experts with I think similar goals and ambitions, because resilience should be the goal, and smart should be the just an enabler to come up with solutions. So I think that's why we set up this together with our ladies from EUROCITIES and with SCIS, and with Lina, sorry, from and my colleague Arnold from GRCN, and together with Eddie Hartog from the European Commission, and with Martin Brinskov from OASC. I think we have very good experts who can, with similar ideas and similar ambitions, to come up with more collaboration. And for me, and then I will give up the word to the rest of them, that this webinar would be a success for me, for my personally, if it's if there would be more collaboration between these networks. And this webinar should be just first a part one, and that cities are able to get help from these networks to use smart in a resilient way, as stated in the title. And perhaps, and that's not within just 1 month to do, but a change of state of mind. I think that's necessary, because we are all cities are facing now uncertainty and vulnerability in a way we have never expected before. So that is the reason why we did to organize this webinar, and hopefully a lot of them will follow. That is what was my ambition to start this webinar together with the ladies of EUROCITIES, and of course with the speakers as well, and hope that this will be a success and an opening for webinars to come. So that was what I wanted to introduce this for the rest of the speakers. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Albert. I think that was a very good setting of the scene there, and also setting out your ambitions for where we maybe can take this afterwards. So that's certainly something I think we can talk about a little bit more in the panel session, and I would be interested to get other people's views on that as well, about how we can perhaps take this forward and what kind of support cities might need in order to start making some of this a reality within their areas. Right, next up we have, I believe, excellent, Eddie Hartog. Eddie is the head of unit at DG Connect at the European Commission. So I will hand over to you, Eddie. And
excellent. Well, thank you first of all for inviting me for this, and it's a very good and timely initiative, I think. Now, in the couple of minutes that I have, of course, I need to focus, and what I would like to focus on is, in a way, the paradigm shift in the use of ICT in the smart cities context. I think when we started even 20, 30 years ago, ICT was very much a what they call it, a left brain type of thing. It was controlling the environment. It was sort of mathematical. It was a very different thing than what it is now, which is much more the right brain and the artistic and the creative part of it. So there's a paradigm change from a system thinking to what I would call an ecosystem thinking. I think that is important for today's seminar. To give you an example, we have wonderful projects, and some we will refer to, but no one thought of having a tracing app, for example. And all of a sudden, with a pandemic, we had to adapt, and we are now getting there to work on that tracing app. So I think Albert mentioned this smart as an enabler rather than a purpose in itself. And I think that is really the paradigm shift that we are facing now, that we also would like to build on as a European Commission. And that is where our thinking is changing as well. Our actions are changing. And although we will still have what I would call gadgetry type of investments, where we really want to see the output, the real service for the citizen, the visible part, we're saying more and more we need to actually build the system right. We need to build the right infrastructure that allows us to be more adaptive and resilient, and allows us to innovate by having basically the building in order and not focus so much on the decoration of the building. And that is where the initiative that we have taken, that I will come to, builds on. You need to have a clear vision of what you want to do. And what we said, like, well, if you really want to have these agile, resilient cities, you need a number of things. You first of all need to have a good set of connectivity. So we're looking at 5G connectivity combined with Wi-Fi and other bits, but that is where we need to invest, that the cities are actually properly connected in Europe. We need to make sure also that they work on the same technological families. We found in the work that we do that we're still very fragmented, and unless you just purchase from, let's say, one of the big suppliers that's not necessarily in Europe, we're all very fragmented, and we haven't built that technological family. So we really need to work on the interoperability part of the house. And we need to build on the data sets that we actually use and the formatting of the data sets. That's where we took the initiative of the common data space. If you add to that elements like the marketplace, which in my view is one of the crown jewels of the European Innovation Partnership, and we would also like to roll over into the next, you really start building that foundation, that smart foundation that allows the cities to be agile and resilient and adaptive to the change that they need to have. And so you go more also from a building the house to a replication discussion, because what my talks with cities taught me that it's not about replication or large-scale pilots, because in the end it stays fragment. And I think Albert is right in saying we need to tap into what has been built. Now, in order to bring this together, we said we need two things. We need actually the politicians to buy into this sort of third way of European way of doing business, but also the technicians that, of course, need to follow up on that. And that is where, and I assume that Martin Brinskov will also refer to that, we built this community of www.living-in.eu. Google it and you will find that a number of cities have signed up to this. And they really say, we need to build this house together in its European strength. So now I'm still challenging Albert also for Rotterdam to sign up, because they haven't yet, but we need to get there. And I think we are building that
community. We will do it.
And that community will also then have a set of technical specifications, not in the, let's say, the lock-in way, like one set of standards and that is what you must apply. And Martin will explain the further details of that. But there needs to be a minimum level of interoperability. I always say we need to be part of the same technological family. And that is really what this declaration does. And with that, we would like to build a European cities community. Also, the governance is very different from what the Commission traditionally does with sort of directives and regulations and communications. It's really, I feel that we've placed the Commission in the broader ecosystem in this and not as a sort of on top of the system. And that is really what I enjoy doing with the cities, but it's also the strength of this network that is now emerging. And I think that very much resonates also with what you're trying to do in the resilient cities. It's really this adaptability that we need, this let's join the vision that we have together and work from there, rather than develop something with a number of partners and then hope that someone will replicate it afterwards. You know, it's really the design thinking that we have now installed, and I think we will have a number of elements in place, and we don't have the time to look at financial instruments and stuff, but we will have that community. We will fund common data spaces. We will fund the urban digital platforms. We will fund the marketplace type of activities. We will continue to do horizon activities. We will have a mission on climate neutral and smart cities. So there will be a number of financial instruments in place to support that. And all that I can say is that I'm delighted with this initiative, Albert, that you took to bring these various communities together in a way to build that one community ecosystem that is going to be so typical and so special for the European Union. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Eddie. Right. I think that's given us quite a lot of food for thought, and I think there might be some questions later on on the basis of what you've mentioned there. Next up, we have, I believe, Lena? Yes, we have Lena Liaku. Lena is Managing Director for Europe and the Middle East for the Global Resilient Cities Network. And Global Resilient Cities Network has been born out of what was the 100 Resilient Cities Network. And Lena will, I'm sure, talk us through a little bit more about that and the focus and priorities of the GRCN as we go forward. Thanks, Lena.
Thank you, Brooke, and thank you, Albert, and EUROCITIES for organizing this webinar. So can we go to the first slide? So as Brooke mentioned, the Global Resilient Cities Network builds on the legacy of the 100 Resilient Cities program, and for the last 6 years, we've been working with the global community of cities. It's around 96 cities across all regions in how they operationalize their resilience. And the main focus was through the appointment and institutionalization of resilience offices and chief resilience officer positions. And we will hear from Arnoud from Rotterdam after me. And also the development of the resilience policies, the strategies that create and strengthen the resilience capacity of the cities. Next slide, please. Now, I would like to give a bit of context because we hear about resilience, especially in the last few months due to the crisis. We hear about building back better, resilient recovery. It has been a buzzword. So I think it is important to understand what this really means. And for us, resilience is the ability of a system, of a city, in this case, to not only survive, but thrive in the face of disasters, and whether these are big shocks or natural hazards and natural disasters, or man-made disasters, or this kind of chronic stresses that manifest within a city. And I think that COVID has told us that the capacities that the city needs in order to survive and thrive include a lot of different things. And although COVID was a health crisis, we understood the importance of having robust infrastructure that allows people to work from home and children to attend school from home, the importance of having redundancy in your health systems, the importance to have an inclusive society for your frontline workers, the importance of transparency in leadership and data-driven decision-making. But also this crisis reminded us that we are more vulnerable than we thought. And we need to radically improve our capacity to predict, assess, reduce, and manage risk. And also, we cannot solve all of these problems without actually global cooperation. And I think this current crisis highlighted the importance of global collaboration among cities, among nations, among organizations. Now, resilience is a process. It's not a state of existence. And resilience is about the how, the why. It's about the way of thinking, planning, and acting within the city. And also, resilience needs a very deep understanding, not only of the risks, but also an understanding and an awareness of the structural weaknesses of the systems and the interdependencies among them. And so when we talk about resilient recovery, this is not a linear engineering process. It actually requires unleashing innovation. It's towards creating collective action and focusing, creating these conditions that will pave the path that will change, in a sense, the growth trajectory of the city and will increase social cohesion, will strengthen the economy, and eliminating this kind of underlying weaknesses. Next slide, please. So what has been the role of COVID? And these are the role of technology in this current crisis. And these are some initial, let's say, I try to do a synthesis from what our member cities have been talking about, have been doing. As Michele Acuto said, the director of the Connected Cities Lab, he said at the beginning of the crisis that technology is the sanitation of this crisis. It's similar to how sanitation was the big infrastructure, the big system during the Great Plague. In a similar way, technology has become one of the more critical infrastructures in the current crisis. And we've seen it we've seen different kind of bits and pieces that I would like to highlight. The one is the need for real-time data. And I think that was, and it is very, very clear, whether this is in order to connect with and support the vulnerable communities, whether this is to adjust the public transportation systems, whether this is to support the local economy or even, again, connect with the local economy. There were cases where the cities had to give subsidies that came from the national governments to the SMEs, and they didn't even have their email. They didn't have any way to actually connect with them. The second is, I think we understood also the complexity around the interdependencies of the systems. We saw the changes in the energy consumption and the energy management, the broadband capacity, the supply chains and how they were disrupted, waste management, cybersecurity, among some of the systems that were impacted. And it was interesting how the one actually impacted the other. Then the third kind of observation is the more flexible, agile the organization, the better it performed. So organizations and local authorities that had already working from home policies and robust technology, they were able to kind of adapt very quickly. Or organizations that had more flexible procurement processes or were able to manage their skills and the skills of their staff, and were able to very quickly reallocate responsibilities. And we saw this in Vile, we saw this in the GLA, and we also saw that a lot of cities transitioned into, for example, working from home within 48 hours. Projects that usually take months or years were actually accelerated within a few days. And this also tells us a lot about the capacity and the dynamism of the local authorities when is needed. Next slide. So What are some opportunities as we think about the next phase and as we think about recovery, and what is important in the resilience sphere? So one, we should avoid amnesia. And this is, I think, crucial. It's crucial to actually reflect, learn, and institutionalize lessons. And this is also what happened in Asia, and cities that were impacted by SARS were able to act much quicker. So at this point, we need to ensure that there is a very robust knowledge and reflection processes, and we also move quickly into institutionalize these kind of changes. And usually there is a window of 6 months before people just go to the regular kind of programming. So there is a small window usually into making very kind of groundbreaking and disruptive changes within the city, especially after a disaster. The second element that also is in the heart of resilience and is the heart of this kind of building back better is how you prioritize your investments, your actions based on multiple benefit approaches, and how we ensure, and especially in a space of fiscal constraints, and we know that there are going to be significant fiscal constraints within local authorities, how we ensure that every euro that is invested actually addresses climate change, addresses social cohesion, builds the local economies, promotes digital transition while not creating additional risks. And again, this is also very important in how we manage this kind of multi-benefit with a multi-hazard and multi-sectoral approach. And again, that's not easy. We need to support cities with tools, with processes. We need to work together, and cities need to work together in order to identify and try to create this kind of systems within their local authorities in how you prioritize those investments and how you understand the trade-offs. Again, it is important that there is not one solution doesn't solve everything. So it is a political, in a sense, decision to try to understand what are the actual benefits that you want, what is the impact that you want to have with the different actions and investments. And the third element that is also pivotal, and it has to do also with the contact tracing apps and so on, is how you ensure transparency and engagement with the population, and how we ensure that we protect digital rights, at the same time promote the digital skills, enhance public-private collaboration, being able to articulate to the citizens the why we are doing it, why do we need their data, how we're going to use them, connect with the innovation communities within the cities, make them be part of the design and implementation process. So, and next slide, please. So from our end, we launched a few weeks ago the Cities for Resilient Recovery initiative, and this is an initiative to try to support cities in their resilience thinking. And this is an umbrella initiative. It is driven by our member cities, and Arnaud is one of them, and Rotterdam is one of them, but it's actually open to other cities and other organizations as well. So I think we believe, and this is why we thought that this also webinar is very important, we believe in collaboration among the different organizations. We don't have the luxury at this point to have overlapping or to do multiple, to do the same things. We need to convene, we need to ensure that there is actual value created for the cities. And I think it is pivotal, especially as we know that a lot of funding will be directed towards the recovery efforts. We need to ensure that, this is the one opportunity to kind of ensure that we make it right. We don't have the luxury to not make it right. We have the institutional memory from the other crisis, the other economic crisis in 2008. I think we also need to look at it, what we did well, what we didn't do well, and try again to adapt and support the cities in this kind of next phase. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Lena. That was very, very informative. I have a whole long list of questions I want to ask now, but maybe I'll get a chance to ask one or two later on as part of the panel discussion. Next up, we have Arnaud Molenaar. Arnaud is the Chief Resilience Officer at the City of Rotterdam and is also a member of the Global Steering Committee for GRCN. over to you, Arnold.
Yes, okay, thank you very much. So thank you for the introduction. I'm it's really great to be a participant and a speaker on this webinar, because I really believe in the connection and the combination of smart and resilience. And in my presentation, I will end with a slide with the ideas I have about this. So next slide, please. So Lina already introduced you could say the concept of resilience, and I thought it was good to just start with this simple graph, because it really visualizes this way of thinking actually, and this from the beginning was, well, you could say the core and the fundament for Rotterdam to start working on resilience. So a city that is resilient is able to deal with shocks and stresses, not only by just bouncing back to the original situation, but to also learn from that specific crisis and grow and thrive, as we call it. So the crucial part is, and as we are right in the midst of this crisis, that you really organize to harvest the lessons learned and to map the new vulnerabilities actually, and this gives input to really grow and thrive in your city. So I'm really happy that during this resilient recovery related to COVID in Rotterdam, the Building Back Better principle is the leading principle, and so we're really exciting to find out how this is going to work. And the question is, how are we able as cities to work on a more systematic way on resilience? And that's the next slide, which is really helpful, is to just, if you are aware that resilience is an important new, we could say, urban capacity, then these 7 resilience qualities are really helpful to embed the resilience thinking in, everything actually what your city is doing regarding projects and programs, and also within the organization. So it's not only about the physical infrastructure, as Lina also mentioned, it's also about the citizens. So a city, the resilience of a city starts with the resilience of the citizens. It's about the software and the hardware, what I sometimes say. Lina already mentioned a few of these qualities. So it is about robustness, of course. Are you prepared? But it's also about reflectiveness, what I just mentioned. So are you really capable of learning from, the projects that you are doing or a specific crisis? Redundancy is important, but especially in this case, also flexibility. How flexible is your city? How flexible is your public space? How flexible are your buildings actually? Now we have a lot of empty offices. Are we able to give these offices new functions or partly or change them, etc.? Inclusiveness, I don't think there are more words needed. This is crucial, and to do things in an integrated way. And this has been, you could say, the fundament of our resilience strategy. Next slide, please. So I personally recommend each city to really develop this kind of strategies, and holistic overall resilience strategy. It gives you really good insight in the interdependencies of systems, of the transitions that are going on and how they are interrelated to each other. So in our case in Rotterdam, we identified 6, you could say, important themes. And so it's important to focus on the social resilience aspect. It's important to focus on the energy transition. Quite a new topic, but very important, is cyber resilience. Of course, especially in our case, a low-lying Delta city, climate change is always on the agenda. Resilient infrastructure, and the way that we are working together, what we call the Rotterdam Network City. So these are, you could say, more the thematic, the themes to focus on, and they are crucial to become a resilient city. But nevertheless, you also, additional to this, I think it's important to work on a more systematic way to anchor the resilience thinking in your city. And that's also where we are focused on right now in our city. So next slide, please. And coming to the relationships between smart and resilience. So also in Rotterdam, we do have a smart city program, and we do have a resilience program. Not really working together so far, but we found each other. And why? Because we think two questions are crucial. I think it's important to, more on a structural basis, find out how we can develop smart solutions specifically to become a resilient city. We are already doing a lot of things, but well, I think it's crucial to find out the gaps and to more on a structural and more programmatic way focus on this. But the other side of the flip side of the coin, you could say, is that by investing in smart solutions and connecting everything to each other in our cities, we are also creating new vulnerabilities. So that's why cyber resilience is important. And the picture on the left-hand corner shows this is the blackout after Sandy in Manhattan, that our systems are getting more and more complex. So in this case, during a flood, because of a flood, there was no energy and there was a blackout. Because of the blackout, there was no ICT, and without ICT, you do not have specific smart solutions. And so these interdependencies are important. So smart solutions also have to be resilient in turn. Next slide, please. So what's going on in Rotterdam now, and what I talked with Albert, and what we really would see happening on a more European level between the networks is to find out the synergy between the resilience programs and the smart city programs to answer these two questions. And so how can we develop smart solutions to become resilient, and how can we really focus on the resilience of the smart solutions? And I think there are three, you could say, phases or more pillars that cities can focus on. So that's, for example, the exploration phase where we are entering now. So what are the gaps? What do we already have on smart solutions related to resilience? But what are the gaps related to the technical aspects, but also to the social aspects? And but we also can start with several pilots, and I think that's what we're talking about now. How can we develop, for example, starting with a group of cities that are in the overlap of the GRC and the SSC and the OASC, to start together, develop a program where we really, well, on a structural way, can work on the synergy between smart and resilience programs. Thank you.
Thank you, Arno. That was also very interesting. I'm currently got a very, very long list of questions I've written down, so I hope that everyone else has also got some questions. Just a reminder, please feel free to put your questions into the chat box. Otherwise, we'll open the floor for people to raise their hands, etc. after Martin has spoken. So Martin Brinskov is the chair of the Open and Agile Smart Cities, or OASC or OASC, one of the many acronyms that Arno just shared with us at the end there. There are quite a few in the smart cities landscape these days. And he's also associate professor at the University of Aarhus. Martin, over to you.
Thank you very much, Brooke. Next slide, please. And thanks for the invitation, Albert, everyone, to be here. I think it's really a good moment to reflect on the status here. I have 3 points. I represent a global network of local networks, born in Europe, but born global, but with a really focused work around the technical underpinnings of what we just discussed. So I have 3 points, and the next slide, please. The first one being the scope of this exercise. The second is, okay, so how do we then connect everything so that we can do or mitigate and act in an agile way without becoming more vulnerable. And last, something about the status we have now. First, I think we have to scope our discussion when we talk about smart cities to really include communities, because it's everyone. So it's basically wherever we are, where people dwell on the planet here. And it's not just about the digital, it's also about physical and human systems. And the goal, and this is taken from the joint definition very nicely from ITU, which is the United Nations sort of Standards Development Organization, and ISO/IC, is to deliver a future for its citizens, which I think is good, but also a tall order. So just to ensure that from the outset, we are not scoping this exercise too narrowly. And I think the previous speakers have really excellently also given examples of how this is now the emerging perception of the task at hand. Next slide, please. So the problem is, of course, that where we are, on the ground, that's not a sector. That's all sectors coming together. It's the cocktail effect of everything digital, and it's all data. And obviously, one approach could be to just lob all of that together. Wouldn't be quite resilient, would it? I'm not sure it even would be smart. Of course, you could do some analysis, but you would make yourself immediately very vulnerable. So that's the challenge we have. We have to approach all sectors in a common way. So how do we do that technically as well? Next slide, please. So there can be too much connectivity, and we know from history in the electrical systems, we need circuit breakers so that we are not going down when one is going down. We need firewalls so when one house burns, the whole city doesn't burn. And in this COVID situation, of course, we know that interactions can be, well, dangerous. So how do we create this minimal but sufficient interoperability for these smart resilience systems? Well, that's what we do in OSCE, in fact. Next slide, please. So one way to do this is to have these quite focused building blocks, if you want, or minimal interoperability mechanisms where you can find data, you can understand it, you can share it on terms, so it can be free, it can be for money, it can work. And of course, you need to take care that your privacy and the whole integrity of your identity is well catered for. And you need to understand, so what happens when systems sort of take decisions on their own. So just to be very short, that's the idea. How can we have this, what Eddie called, a family of technologies that are different, but built on a common ground? And so you mentioned also the livingin.eu initiative, Eddie. The technical specification, there are 5 commitments, and one is technical. There's financial, legal, and so on. And the technical specifications are actually built around this idea about MIMS and building on stuff that already exists. And I just wanted to add that also the Japanese Society 5.0 strategy has the same kind of mindset in it. So it is emerging in a very concrete way. Next slide, please. And this is my final slide. So the third point is, I think we actually have all the bits and pieces already. I don't think they are toys, but certainly they are not mature enough yet, and they're not available in the mainstream market as readily available to those who want to procure, who want to buy interconnected but not too connected systems. Of course, we could build resilient fortresses, but that wouldn't give us the agility, would it? So how do you then actually procure, manage contracts, and develop and deploy these technologies in practice? That's what we have done in Synchronicity, which was a large-scale pilot, just ended, and it's already brought into, as you see, the European initiatives, Japanese and other places around the world. And fortunately, and this is my final point, it is already taking into account many of these network memories. I liked the amnesia point, Lina. So that has already been integrated. So the participants were, some of them were part of the resilience movement and network. Some were lighthouse cities. So, I mean, from the ground, really, this point, you don't care where the problem comes from and not too much about the solution if it gives you a more inclusive, prosperous, sustainable future for your citizens. But that's actually hard to achieve, and we are many that are working to that point. And our little contribution is on the technical side, but in a way that is very practical and accessible, and can also be inserted in other initiatives, which, whether they are technical, on the policy, on the financing, on the monitoring, measuring, or on the capacity building. So thanks for being here, and I'm very happy to take part of this ongoing discussion and also convergence, I think.
Great, thank you very much, Martin, and thank you to all our speakers. We have a growing number of questions and hands up now, and they're not my questions just yet. We'll start with Ilaria Rossetti. She asks how the particular themes have been identified in Rotterdam. So Arno, I think that's one for you in the resilience strategy.
Yes, sir. Thank you. So in 2016, we launched this strategy, and we already started, I think, somewhere in 2014 and 15 by applying what we call the preliminary resilience assessment. It's a tool developed in the context of the network. And so together with representatives of really the key stakeholders in the city, we started dialogues and used also data to identify these themes, actually. And we asked ourselves, okay, we identified actually the shocks and stresses that are relevant, and we identified the possible sectors that with these themes that are crucial to work on the resilience aspects in a more systematic way. And this has been translated into this overall, you could say, integrated strategy. I hope this helps.
Thank you. I will come to the people with their hands up in a minute. I just want to deal with some of the questions in the chat. We have a question from Debrecen. I should learn to pronounce it properly, my apologies. In Hungary, from Moshe. He is interested in how you identify the teams to work on in the ongoing projects. And could the presenters give a more concrete view of the ongoing projects that are driving their cities to be more resilient, and the sort of tools and etc. that are being developed in response to that? And there's a lot of questions in here. Maybe we'll start with that. There's also one around sort of empowering citizens and how you engage both with citizens and with local businesses in particular. So I think maybe Lena, you'd like to start with that one, because I think there's quite a few things there that touch on your presentation. And then I can work through the rest of the questions in this one.
Sure, and I think also Arno can share his experience. And I would just very quickly say, yes, you need all of them if you want to build resilience, like every single one. So, I mean, it's great that you kind of, you identified all of them. Now, for us, what is important, and resilience takes time. And that's why it's not just like, I want to be resilient, I am resilient. A lot of work needs to happen, and this is the importance of the Chief Resilience Officer and the Resilience Office position in trying to create the internal processes that, the Resilience Office in a sense works horizontally within the city, trying to connect the different silos that exist and the different kind of strategies and sectors. It works internally and externally. So trying to connect with the stakeholders within your city, trying to connect with the international environment, whether this is, the European other European cities or the global cities or the global declarations, but also connecting vertically within the city, being able to articulate the why and the how to the politicians, while at the same time have a deep understanding of the technical elements within the city. So in a sense, the resilience is not, just one sector, it's one like policy line, but it's actually like a convening kind of hub. And then on top of that, there are multiple tools, to be honest, and Arnaud mentioned the preliminary resilience assessment. There's the resilience scan tool that also Rotterdam and GRCN co-developed. There are actually processes and methods, in order to support this kind of multi-stakeholder discussions, whether you want to identify new projects, whether you want to prioritize a portfolio of projects, whether you want to articulate the resilience value of a project or a system, or understand the risks, and so on. So you need all of them. It takes time. And that's what an important piece. When we're talking about building back better or resilient recovery, this takes time. This is not, we need, so it is important to identify what are the quick wins, but at the same time, how we ensure that we actually build for the future.
Great. Martin, do you have some anything to add on that? And also, what sort of, do you use EU funds? Do you have living labs or anything, your pilot projects and how that works?
Yeah. So on the funding part, I think it's very important if you see it from the demand side. And I represent, the demand, the cities, the communities, the users. I think it's important that these financial instruments are not too constrained by only catering for one purpose. They need to fit into other needs. They're like engines of the evolution. So I think it's very important to see the financing and the instruments in a context, just as we have to see the technical part in a context. So that's the first point. The second is, I think that actually already from what Lina and others have presented, there's a lot of capacity there. The network of not just CROs, so the chief resilience officers, but similar, more holistically oriented people who are now helping to organize things, not just on the local level, also on the regional and national level. National level is really important in turning this into concrete strategies, and then of course in the global regions. So I'm quite confident that these things are coming slowly together.
Thank you. Arno, did you want to come in on any of those points?
Maybe one additional remark. So in Rotterdam, we what I mentioned, and we talked already about these specific themes. But of course, you have to find out how it really works. So Lina already mentioned it takes time, and actually together with the relevant stakeholders, we have to find out what resilience actually means on different scales in the city. And that's why we started to focus on a certain district. It's really an experiment, and we are finding out together with the residents in that specific district how we can use, for example, the energy transition, but also climate adaptation as a leverage to become a more social resilient district. And the other case is on the scale of a building. So the renovation of a huge building with people from 125 nationalities are living in. We talked about the resilience of this renovation of this building, and how can we do this in a real integrated way. And so we are also investing in these, you could say, pilots on different scales in the city. And that's really helpful.
Excellent. We have a couple of hands up. Eddie, you have your hand up. Do you want to?
Just on that question, if you don't mind me coming in briefly, what I find from the presentations, and I'm very encouraged by that, is that there's a lot of connecting points in the presentations. I mean, when I mentioned the 3 layers, connectivity, technical family, and common data space, for me that resonates with what Lina said on the real-time data and interdependence. I might call it interoperability, or but I think there's those common elements are there. Also, Arno's definition of a resilient city. Probably if I ask his counterparts in the other 80,000 cities, there will be a slightly different way of putting it. But essentially, it comes down to bringing sectors together, having the fundamentals of the house right in a similar way, and not necessarily a fully harmonized way. That's where Martin's minimum interoperability mechanism. So I see a lot of similarity to say, what do we need to construct that house to be resilient? We will all formulate it differently. Some has 5 indicators, the other has 7 or 3, whatever. I mean, but we are working on this. And so on the question then is, are there examples of it? Yes, there are. Albert in his introduction mentioned the lighthouse projects which we are trying to bring together. There are a lot of examples in Europe. I think the word that we haven't used yet, and I want to bring that in, is the scaling of solutions. So far, all of them are suboptimal in scale. You find 20 cities doing one thing, 30 cities doing another, and the small cities falling between the cracks because they don't have the capacity to engage in these European projects. And that is really the gap that we are trying to fill with the exercise that I see very joined up with what you're doing on the Resilient Cities exercise. Also internationally, Martin mentioned the links with the G20 and the Japanese, where I also have a similar vision. I think there was a question on the Middle East. Now, we are working very closely with the Union for the Mediterranean, with the Northern African cities, for example. All of this is scalable and adaptable. If you have that same philosophy and if you allow for that flexibility and resilience of the system, we really have a unique potential to build that, what I call third way in terms of a scaled solution without having a cut and paste from one city to the other. And I think that is really what is important in this word resilience and scaling. So I wanted to add that to the conversation.
Thank you, Eddie. That was very helpful intervention. We've got Ignacy Fontanel on with the hand up. If you can unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, I'm in Barcelona, and I wanted I wanted to talk about or ask something about business model. I am an entrepreneur that has created a startup in Barcelona to work around city resilience and trying to build a business model on this, and we fail as 90% of the startups. But I wanted to point that I wanted to ask what we can do to create a business model based on resilience. I'm thinking here about, energy sector. There are the ESCO models where there are companies who are proposing services in exchange of economies of energy, etc., etc. So, is there in resilience, in the file of resilience, a business model that could help entrepreneurs, startups to create new tools? Because my experience is I create a tool, I propose the tool to chief resilience officers. It was it was maybe ahead of the market, but there was a problem about the business model. So how we can monetize the idea of resilience to create an Europe with startups and with business models that can expand around the world?
Good question. I see a lot of nodding from our panelists. Does anyone want to bravely take on that question? Martin? All yours, go for it.
Yeah, sure. I mean, this is really an important question because a very large part of the economy actually comes from the interaction between the procurers and public procurers, very large part of the GDP, the entire economy, and smaller companies. So actually the answer would be the same. And what we did in the large-scale pilot was actually just to see how 50 services, 50 services, led by small and medium-sized enterprises could quickly be procured and deployed in a lot of cities, 20 cities around Europe and abroad. So again, the answer is not to have these big monolithic fortresses that only very big companies can manage, and they become the gatekeepers. We have to give the power back to those who buy, so that there are certain demands that the interconnectedness doesn't leave out the smaller players, because you want a thriving ecosystem on both sides of the market. So both on the selling side and on the buying side. So again, if you have fair, reasonable access to the interoperability mechanisms that you can put into your systems, actually you can plug in. Sigristi that I showed have lots of examples of exactly that.
Eddie? I might also see if after Eddie, if Georg from DG Energy would like to comment on this one as well.
Yeah, just very, very briefly on that one. It's a very important one, the ecosystem and the opportunity for smaller and medium-sized companies to actually engage in this. Martin already mentioned the fact that we also look at communities, so also below 50,000 citizens, but the same we do for companies, also to allow that agility, be part of the family, but then be able to scale quickly, because often it's not the starting that's difficult, it's the scaling that is difficult for the small companies. And that is why you want to create that family. It's also something that is being done in, you may have heard of the Digital Cities Challenge that we have in the European Commission, led by the colleagues from DG Grow, which is now going into the Intelligent Cities Challenge, very much focusing on the ecosystem for businesses to thrive in that whole ecosystem. I looked at it from the city side, so from the government, public side. If the same philosophy and the same principles are applied by TM Forum, for example, very similar ideas of making sure we have an open community in this, which would also allow smaller and medium-sized companies to thrive. And my last point on this is again to refer to the marketplace. It's precisely what the marketplace is trying to do, to bring parties together in this common effort so that everyone can have a piece of the cake and there won't be one cake eaten by one big company.
That was a seamless transition to Georg, actually, if you're there, Georg, to just if you want to respond with a particular reference to the marketplace.
Well, yes. I mean, first of all, I would like to echo what Eddie said. So, I mean, the marketplace is operating in exactly that area. What we try to do when speaking about scaling, it's not only scaling single solutions, it is making them bigger in terms of scaling up from, let's say, neighborhood to district level or district to city level. It's also to aggregate the demand. And this across Europe, we might have many cities, and especially smaller and medium-sized cities, being in a very similar situation. So there is a huge potential for aggregating that demand and to bring that to a larger scale. And that's actually where we operate. And we try to do that with a process which we call matchmaking. It's essentially taking project promoters and then independent, whether it's a city or a company, by the hand, helping them shape their project ideas into a bankable stage, a maturity which allows to bring these projects in front of our investor network in order to let them be financed. And that would, of course, following the rather integrated holistic approach we follow, that would apply to pretty much anything we heard today that is, of course, ICT, that is energy, that is mobility, and any combination of that. So we really try to sort of address that bottom up and create a market there.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Georg, for that. We need to move on in a couple of minutes to just some reflections from our speakers and then to wrap up. So I'm going to, Edward Horton, you have your hand up. So do you want to ask a question? And then hopefully there might be time for one or two more from the chat.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much as well to the panel for a really very interesting discussion. I research and particularly interested in systems level resilience, and one of the qualities or components I haven't really heard the panel talk about yet is the capacity for the system to learn, for us to evaluate within a resilient system and then to continuously improve. So I just wonder if the panel could reflect on that, and in particular to what extent you see cities and urban systems currently learning and improving resilience as a result of the current pandemic. It seems to me like an opportune time to talk about a learning system, and it hasn't really come up in the conversation yet today. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Edward. That was actually one of the questions on my list, so I'm very excited that someone's asked that. Eddie, do you want to start, and then maybe Lena as well, because that's something that you mentioned quite a bit in your presentation.
It's very much part of the reflection that we're having now. I mentioned the 3 layers that you need to get services going. So the connectivity, the technical family, interoperability, and the common data space. And then you look at the services, because the mayors asked me, well, what does that mean to me? Why would I do that? Because I need services to my citizen. And we look at that as well. Now, from DG Connect, that's a specific, technology-driven type of DG. in a way, we stop looking at the traditional smart services. I mean, the cities can do it themselves. We can bring it together. Marketplace. People ask, how can we access? We have leaflets, guides, websites, etc. What we would like to focus on, and that is my fourth component. I didn't bring it up because I didn't feel it was topic of today, but I think it's very good that you asked the question. We really want to look at artificial intelligence and data-driven services that would allow city planning, energy management, a number of things that help. And that is, I think, where the capacity to learn comes in through the artificial intelligence. And that is, if you like, I call it the top level services that are still a bit geeky for some people, is something that we can add to the palette of instruments to cities. So a very good question and a very important topic.
Great, thanks, Eddie. I think, Lena, if you're still there, it would be good to have your thoughts on that, particularly around sort of trying to create within city governments, I guess, as a starting point, that kind of institutional culture of learning and being able to reflect, I guess, quite honestly on what has happened and what needs to happen.
Yes, and this is why I mentioned that we need to avoid amnesia. What we've seen from the cities, and I will share some examples, especially cities that had previous crises to deal with, and the cases like Cape Town because of the drought, Manchester, and I know a colleague from Manchester is on the line. I think they already have started actually reflection sessions, and I know that Cape Town has initiated a very kind of robust, even from the start of the response, a very robust structure within their stakeholders in a weekly basis to try to capture the learning and then trying to synthesize it and so on. This is usually cities don't do that. And that's why I said that we see this kind of best practices from cities that have already been through another crisis. We've seen, on the other hand, some cities that understand this need and trying to address it, even if it's just, you know, a survey to the citizens, try to capture what was the experience, what do they think happened, what, you know, try to capture this kind of knowledge. And I think it's very important, and I understand that Eddie alluded to that, how we capture this knowledge in a way that is replicable and shareable. Because what we experience, let's say in London, and what you've experienced in Brussels, I mean, how do we actually share this, elevate this, and we use these lessons learned in order to identify, you know, new programs or new policies, etc.
Great, thanks, Lena. So many good questions. One or two more I might just squeeze in, and then unfortunately we're going to have to wrap up or move to reflections. Apologies if we don't get to your question. We will try and see if we can deal with it offline. A couple of them in particular are quite comprehensive questions, so almost a topic for a separate city dialogue, I think. So that's something for us to think about. One here from someone in the University of Newcastle regarding what type of funding opportunities are there likely to be and when will the calls be out? So I guess the sort of future calls, if they're, will they be more focused around resilience and smart cities or not, or something different? Who wants to take that one? Maybe Georg or Eddie? No one wants to jump at that one at the moment.
Often when it's money, they look at the European Commission. So,
well, there was funding calls, so I thought it was you.
And you're absolutely right to do so. So my first plea to you is talk to your Minister of Finance today. The European Commission has made a very ambitious proposal to actually give us the funding to do all of this. So you need to convince them to support us. That's the first bit. If you then look at the opportunities that we get, and we have slides, I mean, there's whole presentations on what can be done, but roughly it is about the research part. So under the Horizon Europe, there will be a strong component on European cities, including emissions on climate neutral and smart cities. The marketplace will be continued under the Horizon program. You will see investments in the Digital Europe program for cities. I mentioned already, particularly but not exclusively, the interoperability, the platforms that we want to invest in, and the common data spaces for various sectors, including for smart cities. And then you will find also the Connecting Europe facility that will invest in infrastructure. We really would like to have a component on the 5G for cities in there. So there's a number of financial instruments that will be available, and I haven't even mentioned the structural funds, which is your money that you can use. And again, there I often find that people say, okay, I have a call which is a European Union call, so I do one thing, and then my money for the urban development, I use it completely dissociated from what I do collectively. And there I think we can have joined up initiatives with the billions of funding that will be available for urban development. So there are a number of streams, and I think maybe we can, when this has matured a little bit, have a separate session on that, on what are the opportunities that there are. But my answer is always, there's no shortage of money. There's a shortage of very good ideas to bring all of this together.
Thanks, Eddie. Georg, I don't know if you want to come in on that perhaps, and also you have your hand up, so you can perhaps cover both of those at the same time.
Yes, thank you. Happy to do so. So first of all, again, I can only echo what Eddie has said. Maybe I should add also that the Green Deal as such has a very strong building component. There's the renovation wave you might have heard of. There's a strong component on mobility also underneath. As concerns the renovation wave, DG Energy is of course very strongly involved there, and obviously buildings are forming a subset of cities, so there's a whole lot of money coming that way as well, whereas that is still being defined right now. There is also the discussed so-called recovery package, which will also, since it is strongly linked to the Green Deal, will also pay a share on that resilience thing. So helping cities to actually overcome the crisis. Now that is also in the make, so I can't give any details here, but it's all stuff which comes in support of cities. So that's really good news, I think. What I wanted to say for the hand up is actually that I have forgotten, for whatever reason, that we organize a virtual matchmaking event next week, and Esben from ICLEI and also a team member of the Smart Cities Marketplace has rightly mentioned that in the chat. So I just wanted to say that as well. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Georg. And just following on from that, where there are links to websites and other resources that have been mentioned today and in the chat, we will put those, I say we, Manon will put those in a follow-up email to everyone so that you have easy access to that information. Apologies to Clément and Julia that we haven't been able to get to your questions. We will endeavour to try and get some responses to those offline. I see that Martin has also given some response to Julia in the chat box. So if anyone wants to respond to any of those whilst we're coming towards the conclusion of this city dialogue, then please feel free. What I'd like to do in the remaining 13 minutes, maybe 12, so I can do a final 1 minute, is ask our speakers to perhaps take a couple of minutes to just reflect on the different presentations that you've heard and the questions, etc. And just, I think, really what the priorities, let's go with top 2 priorities, could or should be for cities in bringing these 2 areas of smart and resilience together. What are the 2 sort of next steps that we should be taking at whichever level is appropriate? I'm going to start with you, Eddie, just to, put you on the spot. And then we can maybe go through a similar order to the speakers before and finish with you, Albert.
Absolutely no problem. I think I said this already. The convergence of the various presentations for me was very telling. The building blocks, in my view, the vision is all the same. I think the word scaling we need to bring in. And what I would hope is that with the various funding instruments, we can still maintain a sort of collective vision as to where we are going. And again, that is why I want to build that community through the livingin.eu with all the different elements. And I think from that you can build on, you can plug in a number of elements, whether that is going to be the services through artificial intelligence, the machine learning, whether it's going to be increased resilience. There's a number of things that we can build on, but I found there's a lot of symmetry in the vision that we have, and a lot of symmetry in the efforts that we're undertaking together. So I must say, for me, it was very encouraging to see that today.
Thank you. Lena, would you like to provide your thoughts and reflections?
Sure. And first of all, thank you again for organizing this. This was a great webinar, and actually the discussion was very nice, and the questions. From my end, and this is, I think, just let's say a personal reflection and let's say excitement I have. We've been working on resilience for quite a long time, and we've been talking about resilience for even more time. Still, there is a lot of work to be done to operationalize it on the ground, to create the necessary processes, policies, to ensure that we actually safe-proof our city systems, because we are vulnerable, and we saw it. And we need to take, issues around risk and resilience need to be part of the strategic way of thinking, both at the local scale and at the national and international one. So I think it's a great also opportunity to, again, convene, join forces, and try to support cities, whether this is, with funding, with capacity, with knowledge, with connection, with technology, in order to try to find, the right policy, the right projects that will safe-proof the citizens and the city systems.
Excellent, thank you. Arno?
Yes, I am unmuted. So again, also from my side, thanks for creating this opportunity. I think the discussion was really interesting, and in my last slide of my presentation, I already did a little bit an attempt of thinking about next steps. So I think it's good maybe in the few cities to start collect what are already the proven concepts or proven solutions that are contributing to resilience or the so-called best practices, and already start sharing these best practices, not in the cities, but between the cities, but also start identifying gaps and start pilots. And I think that's the strength of now working together. Maybe we can find and define and start with a select group of cities that write a program together with these components, and especially scaling up the possibilities in the cities, but also between the cities. That also maybe helps to get a business model for specific solutions. And a tiny reflection on the discussions before was about the question about the lessons learned. I presented the 7 key qualities, and the top one was actually reflectiveness. So that's, I think, really crucial. We talk about reflectiveness, but we do not do it. We did not explicitly organize it, and that's, I think, crucial in our projects and especially now during this crisis. Thank you.
Thanks, Martin. And I think that was a very important point about the reflection, not just talking about it, but actually doing it. And I think you may have also led us in a particular direction about perhaps some of the some things that we can do to further support some of this discussion and taking it further. Martin, would you like to share your reflections with us now, please?
Yes, I have many, but one that sticks is really, and it builds on what the colleague said before, and you, Arno. I think we have a critical mass now of people who know what doesn't work. And I think that is really the power of the pilots. Actually, it's not so much only the successes, it's the hundreds and thousands of things that do not work. Of course, if you keep doing pilots and things that do not work, it's a waste of time. But again, the amnesia, if you learn, if you pilot and you experiment in systematic ways, and that's how you build your resilience, that's how you build your smartness. That's really powerful, because in the end, you learn and you have enough people around who do not do things that we know are not really working well. And I think so that's one point. Really, we need to keep piloting, but we need to do it in a systematic way. So I think that's one point. The other point is that we also need to find this common ground. I think, and I'm speaking from a technical perspective now, the big monolithic fortresses, whether they're commercial or they're public, forget it. That's not how the world works, and it's not resilient. What if there's a flaw, design flaw? Whoop, it all goes down. So finding this common ground, which actually makes it possible for us to interact as cultures, as economies, as a planet. I think those are really the two issues that stick after this conversation. Very happy to continue it.
Thanks, Martin. That was not tackling any big issues at all. They're both very large, and I think for me the learning from the mistakes is very important, and I think with that is definitely the need for a culture of trust that allows for that honest exchange of what didn't work, because I think sometimes we have a tendency to try and maybe put the rose-colored glasses on with some of these things, and I think that openness and trust is very, very important in there. Right, so finally, Albert, do you want to give us a couple of minutes of your reflections and perhaps thoughts on next steps?
Yes, thank you. What to add to all this good reflections, of course, of all the presenters. I started with, in my introduction, what this webinar should be, make it a success. And I mentioned more collaboration between these networks. And I think what I've heard today, I'm sitting here in my hometown with a big smile, because I heard a lot, I learned a lot, and I think with all the suggestions made by, for example, by Eddie from the European Commission, as well from Georg Huben, those who do not know those people from the European Commission, there is a lot to learn and to share with them, and they are open for suggestions. And I think the same is for our partners from GRCN. They are open for suggestions, and they are willing to help. So that is, I think, key for this our first webinar, and hopefully a range of webinars more content related, because we need their help. As well for the 100 cities within smart cities and communities, because we cannot do it on our own. It's too complex, and what Lina already mentioned, and my colleague Arnold as well, it will take time. And perhaps I can give you an example for how difficult it is to learn for people to understand what it is to be smart or to be resilient. When I started 4.5 years ago, I started with Ruggedized as a coordinator. And one of our main private partners came to me and he said, Albert, I signed a contract for the European Commission, but it was the biggest mistake of my life, because I do not trust European working. And after 3 years and I said, no, please try. And after 3 years, now he is the ambassador of a big international company regarding energy. So first he was not into it by far, and after 3 years, he is now the energy advisor of the board of a big international company. So that is it takes time before people really are open to learn, and it is not trying to follow a kind of a course, and then after 2 days you say, okay, now I'm resilient, or now I'm smart. That's not, I think, the solution by far. So it will take time, but I think this crisis learns a lot to all, and looking to the participants from all over Europe and outside of Europe, I think that is a big step and a great step and a good opportunity to try to find the collaborations together, of course, with Martin. I have not mentioned him as well, but I think we are now on the point that we can take steps in a way that we couldn't find that before. So I think for me, this webinar is a success, and hopefully I think there will be a lot to follow coming weeks and coming months. And I think with the help of the European Commission, with GRC and all the other European institutions like the EIP and lots of others, and of course with the facilitation of EUROCITIES, I think we are in a good position to follow up this kind of webinars. So for me now, I'm happy. That's
excellent. I'm glad to hear you're happy there. I have learned a lot, which I can't often say on a webinar actually, or a city dialogue. It's been very, very informative, and also I have, as I've mentioned, a head full of questions now, which I think suggests that, for me anyway, that there is perhaps some value in continuing in this continuing this dialogue. Perhaps I could just ask, before everyone rushes off to their next meetings, could you just click on raising your hand if continuing this dialogue, perhaps getting into a little bit more of the how to do some of these things in cities, is something that would be of interest to you? If I can just, everyone, if you can just, that number is going up quite quickly. So I'm thinking that's a yes, which is more work for us, but I think also something that would be valuable to cities. So I think this is, I think that's a definite resounding positive on continuing this dialogue. And I think we can also do that in a way that I think is, as everyone's mentioned, sort of collaborative, is bringing together the different elements that we have had in this, in our presenters, from the Commission, from the city level, from resilience, from smart, and where they all intersect and interact, I think is something that is definitely worth exploring a lot more. I'd just like to thank everyone, our speakers. That was for very, very useful and informative presentations, very insightful, and I think quite inspiring for a lot of us. And also to Manon and Albert for helping to organize this webinar. Sorry, City Dialogue. I think that's been, it's been super helpful, and you've organized it seamlessly. And also to everyone who has participated in this, either just listening or asking questions and making some comments on in the chat box. As I said, we will send a follow-up email with links to the resources and information that's been mentioned in presentations. Some of them are in the chat box already, but it's easy to lose track of those. And yes, we'll keep an eye on the EUROCITIES webinar website or sign up to mailing lists, and then you'll be sure to get an invitation when we organise what looks like our second City Dialogue on this very important area. So thank you very much and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you for organising.
Thanks. Cheers.
Cheers.
Bye.
Thank you very much.
you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.